I hadn't been back to the ranch in over 5 years, and honestly, I didn't know what to expect. My old truck rumbled over the gravel driveway, and the sun bounced off the fences like it was shining just for me. Every bend in the road, every tree, every patch of dirt brought back memories, the kind you can't find in photos or videos. I could almost hear my little brother laughing as he chased the cows, and the smell of Mom's apple pies wafted from the old farmhouse kitchen, even though I knew it was gone now. As I rounded the final corner near the gate, my stomach flipped. 2 men in uniforms were standing there, blocking the entrance like sentries in some bad action movie. One had a smug grin plastered across his face, the other scribbled on a clipboard like he owned the place. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of prank. Maybe Dad hired friends for a welcome-back joke, but the way they held themselves, the seriousness in their stance, made my gut tell me otherwise. "This property is now under HOA control," one of them said, voice firm, like I was supposed to instantly obey. I blinked. "Excuse me," I said. My hands instinctively went to my hips. "This is my family ranch, always has been. I was born here. I don't care what HOA you're pretending to represent, I'm going in." He waved the clipboard. I squinted at it. The paper looked official enough to fool someone in a hurry, but I could see the cheap font, the typos, the lack of signatures. Something about it screamed fake, yet there was a tension in the air that made me pause. "You need to leave," he said, voice still calm, almost rehearsed. "We have authority now, you can't enter." I laughed out loud, nervous laughter but laughter nonetheless. Authority? On what planet? The only authority here is family, cows, and maybe a stubborn old scarecrow that won't stop leaning on the fence. The other guy didn't smile. He just straightened up, giving me that slow, measured stare that makes your skin crawl. Behind them, I noticed something even worse, a line of shiny red HOA-branded trucks rolling up as if on cue. The fake cops weren't alone. This was a full-blown blockade designed to intimidate me, to make me turn around without a fight. My fingers itched to call anyone, but I knew it wouldn't matter. I had to handle this myself. I stepped out of the truck, keeping my hands visible. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wanted them to underestimate me, just like I was trying to figure out how to underestimate them. "Look," I said, trying reason first. "I have deeds, records, and history that prove this land is mine. My family built this place from scratch. You can't just show up in plastic badges and claim it like a fast food coupon." They didn't flinch. The clipboard waved again. "We have documentation," one said. "You don't belong here." I glanced at the papers. Half the info was wrong, misspelled names, wrong lot numbers. My pulse quickened. I wanted to grab the documents and tear them up, but I held back. I needed more than gut feeling, I needed proof. Then one of them made the mistake that cost them everything in my eyes. He smirked and said, "You could call the cops, but they'll side with us." That was it, the spark. I realized right there that this wasn't just some petty misunderstanding. They thought they could bully me off my land. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I inhaled, steadying myself. My hand brushed against the side of my truck, my mind racing through every story Dad had ever told me about standing up for the ranch. I wasn't leaving, not today, not ever. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the fields, I knew this was only the beginning. They might have thought they had the upper hand, but they hadn't counted on me being stubborn, prepared, and maybe a little crazy about defending what was mine. I climbed back into the truck, staring at them through the windshield. "All right," I muttered under my breath. "Let's see how far this HOA fantasy goes." And just like that, the game had begun. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept replaying the scene at the gate, the fake badges, the clipboard, the smug grins. How could someone just claim a family ranch like it was theirs? I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and that familiar fire Dad had always said runs in our veins. By sunrise, I knew I had to go back. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my hat, and reminded myself, patience. This wasn't a fight to start, it was a fight to win. When I drove up again, my truck rattling over the gravel, they were waiting, 2 guards, the same fake badges, and the same smug expressions. Behind them, the red HOA trucks gleamed like a warning. I stopped a few feet away, letting the engine idle. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white. "This is your last chance," one said, voice low but commanding. "Step out or we call the police." I swallowed hard but didn't move. "You're going to have to explain to the police why you think you own someone else's property," I said. The other guy chuckled. "We've done this before, people always back down when we show them the documents." I laughed even though my stomach twisted. "Documents? I've seen more authentic receipts from a lemonade stand than whatever you're waving around. You want to see my family's deeds." They exchanged a glance like they were deciding whether I was crazy or confident enough to be a threat. Then the first guy stepped closer, clipboard in hand. "You need to leave, we're enforcing HOA rules." I shook my head. "Enforcing HOA rules on land that's been in my family for generations? Let me get this straight, you're telling me a few printed papers make you the boss of my backyard?" I noticed a small detail that gave me hope, a tiny typo on the clipboard's header. If their documentation was this sloppy, maybe they weren't legally armed to stand in front of me. "Look," I said, "I don't want trouble, I just want to walk onto my property without being threatened." The first guy's smirk widened. "Trouble, we're just doing our job, if you try to enter, things could get messy." That word, messy, made my blood boil. I glanced at the trucks behind them, imagining all the neighbors who would see this unfold. Surely someone would intervene if things escalated. I stepped out slowly, hands raised. "Fine," I said, "I'll play your little game for a minute." They leaned in, expecting fear. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started filming. "This is your first mistake," I said. "Everything you're doing right now, recorded, every word, every gesture, you're not intimidating anyone anymore." Their eyes flicked to the camera. I could see hesitation creep into their expressions. The smirk faded. One of them muttered something about calling backup, but I kept my eyes locked on him. "Go ahead, call whoever you want. I know my property and I know the law. You're standing on land that doesn't belong to you. That's a fact, not a threat." The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Behind them, the sun reflected off the field, making the entire scene look like a showdown in an old Western movie. I half expected tumbleweeds to roll by. Then something unexpected happened. A neighbor emerged quietly from behind the trees, arms crossed, watching, then another. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a few more residents. They weren't confronting the HOA, but their presence was enough to shift the energy. I realized I wasn't alone. These officers might have thought they had the upper hand, but suddenly their confidence wavered. "You don't scare me," I said, stepping a little closer, still holding the camera. "I'm not leaving, not today, not ever." The first guy sighed, frustration creeping into his voice. "You should reconsider." I interrupted. "I will never reconsider. This is my family land, my home, and you're standing in front of me like a bad joke, and everyone watching this knows it." For a moment, silence fell. The fake officers shuffled, looking at each other, realizing this wasn't going to be easy. I got back into my truck, revved the engine just slightly, and said out loud to the camera, "Lesson 1, friends, never underestimate someone defending their own home. These people might think they're in charge, but I've got history, proof, and patience on my side." As I drove off to plan my next move, I knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. The fake HOA had made a mistake thinking I'd back down without a fight. After that first standoff at the gate, I couldn't sleep again. My mind kept replaying their smug faces, the fake badges, and that clipboard they waved like it was sacred. Something about it didn't sit right, and I had a feeling I wasn't the only one they'd tried to push around. I knew I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The first thing I did was call the county records office. I wanted to see the official deeds, maps, and ownership documents. While waiting on hold, I paced around the kitchen, my brain buzzing with every possible scenario. Surely no one could legally take a family ranch that had been ours for generations, right? When the records finally came through, my jaw dropped. The HOA's ownership papers were a joke. Wrong lot numbers, misspelled names, missing signatures. The whole thing was sloppy enough to make a kindergartner blush. I could practically hear Dad in my head. "If something doesn't smell right, it probably is." I knew then that this wasn't just about a misunderstanding. The HOA president had been going around, bullying families, faking documents, and trying to expand their territory without a single legal claim. I felt a mixture of relief and anger, relief that the law was on my side, and anger that someone would stoop this low. I started digging deeper. I drove around the neighboring properties, knocking on doors, asking questions, and trying to piece together their scheme. Most people were hesitant at first, unsure if I was exaggerating or making it up. But as I showed them what I'd pulled from the records, faces changed. Some neighbors whispered about threats, fines, and intimidation tactics. Others sighed, recounting stories about how the HOA had tried to pressure them into signing away parts of their land. It was like peeling an onion, layer after layer of lies. The more I uncovered, the more ridiculous it became. They weren't just trying to control the ranch, they were trying to rewrite history and ownership one bluff at a time. By mid-afternoon, I had a plan forming. I couldn't just confront them again without being fully prepared. I needed proof, documentation, and witnesses. I needed a way to make sure no one could ever question the truth again. I started collecting photos, videos, and old family documents. Every fence post, every tree line, every old barn, I documented it all. I even found some old letters from the county confirming my family's ownership decades ago. It felt good to hold tangible evidence in my hands. This wasn't just a fight for land, it was a fight for the truth, and I had it on my side. Late in the day, I called a few neighbors who had seen the fake HOA in action. Their reactions were priceless. Some laughed nervously at the absurdity of it all. They actually think they can run a ranch like a gated community, one said. Another whispered about how the president had a flair for dramatic threats, but not much else. Every story I heard made me more confident. Then I remembered something important: the fake badges and uniforms. Cheap plastic, misspelled letters, inconsistent logos. Whoever designed these didn't expect someone to look closely. That was my opening. I could expose them for exactly what they were: frauds pretending to have authority. As the sun began to set over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields, I realized that this fight was going to take patience, strategy, and a little bit of humor. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Who would have thought grown adults would try to pull a fast one with plastic badges and fake papers? I leaned against my truck, taking a deep breath. Tomorrow I would return to the ranch, but I wouldn't just drive up blindly. I had a plan and I had evidence. I was ready to confront the HOA with the full weight of the truth, and this time they wouldn't be able to bluff or intimidate me. For the first time in days, I felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't just a fight for property anymore. It was a fight for justice, for family legacy, and for every neighbor who had been quietly bullied by these people, and I had no intention of backing down. I looked at the ranch one last time before leaving. The fields were quiet, the old barns silhouetted against the orange sky, and I could almost hear Dad whispering from the past, "Stand your ground, kid. They'll learn who owns this land." Tomorrow, the real game would begin, and I was going to make sure the HOA learned once and for all that you can't mess with a family and their legacy without consequences. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The ranch wasn't just a place, it was our history, our memories, our identity, and someone had tried to steal that from me. They weren't going to get away with it, not now, not ever. I grabbed Dad's old map of the property, dusted off the corners, and spread it across the kitchen table. Every fence, gate, and boundary was marked in careful detail. My cousin showed up shortly after and we went over the land together. "We're not just defending this property," I said, "we're exposing them, and we're going to do it smart." We started by photographing everything. Every fence post, every tree, every landmark that had been part of the ranch for generations. I even dug out old pictures of the property from when I was a kid. The idea was simple: if the HOA tried to lie about the land, I'd have undeniable proof. Then came the tech side of things. I set up my phone on a tripod to record from a distance, capturing the main entrance and any suspicious activity. I even joked to my cousin that we looked like amateur spies, but honestly, I didn't care. This was war, my kind of war. By midday, we had a strategy. First, we needed witnesses. Neighbors who had seen the HOA overstep, neighbors who could confirm that their authority was fake. I reached out quietly, making sure no one tipped off the HOA that we were planning something. A few brave souls agreed to help, under the condition that I wouldn't put them in danger. While we were planning, I kept an eye out for the HOA. True to form, they had started putting up more private property signs, each one more ridiculous than the last. I laughed under my breath. They really thought plastic signs and cheap threats could scare me away from land that my family had worked for decades to build. By late afternoon, I knew we were ready. The plan was simple but effective: show up prepared, present undeniable proof, and document everything in front of witnesses. I didn't need to yell or argue. Facts don't argue, they win. Still, I couldn't shake a flicker of nerves. I remembered the first time I saw those fake badges, the smug confidence on their faces. They had power in numbers and intimidation, and for a moment I wondered if we were truly ready. But then I thought about my family, the ranch, the cows grazing peacefully in the distance, and my resolve hardened. "Remember," I told my cousin and Dad, "we're not just walking onto our property, we're reclaiming it. And we're doing it with our heads held high." We double-checked everything: the maps, the photos, the videos, and the neighbor witness list. I even rehearsed what I would say if they tried to argue, threaten, or intimidate me again. Every what-if had an answer. By evening, the plan felt airtight. I leaned back against the porch railing, watching the sun dip behind the hills. I could almost picture the HOA president's face when they realized they couldn't bluff their way through this next encounter. The thought made me grin. Humor helped me keep calm. I joked about installing my own HOA, me, Dad, a few cows, and maybe a grumpy scarecrow to keep things official. It lightened the tension, but underneath the laughter was a serious determination. They weren't walking over me, and they weren't walking over the land that belonged to my family. As the stars appeared overhead, I made one final check of the property. Every boundary was clear, every access point accounted for, and every piece of evidence was in my hands. Tomorrow I would return to the ranch, but this time I wouldn't just show up, I would confront, document, and expose the HOA once and for all. I went to bed that night with a mix of excitement and nerves. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time since the fake cops blocked my truck, I felt in control. I had a plan, I had evidence, and I had people willing to stand beside me. The next encounter would be the real test. And I couldn't wait. The morning sun hit the ranch like it was spotlighting the battlefield. My heart was pounding, but I felt ready. Today wasn't about guessing, arguing, or hopping. They couldn't intimidate me anymore. I had proof, witnesses, and a plan. All that was left was to see if it would work. As I turned onto the gravel driveway, I saw them again. Two fake officers standing rigidly in front of the gate, the same smug expressions, the same fake authority. Behind them, the line of HOA trucks gleamed like a red warning sign. Their confidence radiated, at least at first. I slowed my truck and stepped out, phone in hand, camera rolling. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I see you're still patrolling my property." They didn't answer at first, but I could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes. Maybe it was the tripod set up at the corner of the driveway. Maybe it was the neighbors I knew were watching from behind the trees. Either way, something had shifted. The first officer cleared his throat. "You shouldn't be here." "I should?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "This is my land. You've been standing here with plastic badges trying to claim something that's not yours. Care to explain why I shouldn't be?" He looked away. The other officer glanced at his clipboard, flipping pages like he might find some authority hidden in the stack of papers. I walked a few steps closer. "Let's make this simple. These are the deeds," I said, holding out copies, signed, verified, filed. "Your papers, they're a joke. Misspelled names, wrong lot numbers, missing signatures. Pretty amateur if you ask me." The smirk on the first officer's face faltered. I could see it, the confidence cracking. They had counted on fear, not facts. I glanced at the trees and caught movement. A few neighbors were stepping closer, their eyes wide, whispering among themselves. I smiled to myself. Every witness mattered. Every pair of eyes watching this unfold added weight to the truth. Then the HOA president showed up, her heels clicking on the gravel, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her expression. "What's going on here?" she demanded, trying to radiate control. "Just making sure the truth is visible to everyone," I said, still filming. "You're standing on land that doesn't belong to you, trying to bully a family into submission. That ends today." Her face tightened. "We have authority here," she said sharply. I chuckled, a little bitter, a little amused. "Authority? You have plastic badges and some Photoshop documents. That's not authority, that's desperation." The officers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. I could almost hear the mental wheels turning. They were realizing this confrontation wasn't going to be like the first one. I took a slow step forward. "Here's the deal, you leave now, or the neighbors, the county, and the law see exactly what kind of HOA authority you've been using to threaten people." One officer reached for his radio, probably hopping to call for backup. I didn't flinch. "Go ahead," I said, voice steady. "By the time anyone arrives, they're going to see what fraud looks like, and trust me, you won't like it." The HOA president's jaw clenched. I could see it through the sunglasses. She was furious, humiliated, and losing control in front of witnesses. That was all I needed. I raised my phone, recording her reaction, the officers' fumbled attempts at authority, and the witnesses watching quietly from the sidelines. Everything was evidence. Everything was on tape. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably minutes, the first officer muttered, "Maybe we should reconsider." I didn't let them finish. "Yes, reconsider, walk off my property, admit you have no claim, end this charade before it gets worse for you." They hesitated, then slowly backed up. The HOA president glared, but there was no argument left, no evidence, no power, just the truth standing firm right in front of them. I climbed back into my truck, still recording, and looked around at the fields, the barns, the fence lines, everything that had been ours for generations. The adrenaline was still pumping, but a small smile crept across my face. The first battle was over. The fake officers had been exposed, the HOA president humiliated, and the truth firmly on my side. But I knew this wasn't the end. There would be more challenges ahead, more lies to unravel, more confrontations to face. I revved the truck, feeling a mix of relief and excitement. The fight for the ranch was far from over, but now, finally, the odds were starting to tip in my favor. After the first showdown at the ranch, I knew I couldn't just relax. The fake officers had retreated and the HOA president had slunk back to her office, but anyone who's ever dealt with these types knows. When someone loses a battle, they often come back stronger, sneakier, and more desperate. I had to be ready. I spent the next morning going through every piece of evidence I had, deeds, photographs, maps, and videos from the standoff. Every scrap mattered. I labeled, timestamped, and cross-referenced everything. My goal was simple: create an airtight record of every misstep the HOA had made. If they tried to twist the story, I wanted the truth to hit them like a brick wall. Then came the surveillance. I set up cameras around key points, the gate, the driveway, and even along the fence lines. I wanted to catch any activity, any attempt by the HOA to intimidate me, sneak in, or falsify claims. I joked to my cousin that we were turning the ranch into Fort Knox, minus the guard dogs, although I wasn't opposed to adding a few for moral support. I reached out to neighbors quietly, explaining the situation and asking if they had any records, letters, or encounters with the HOA. A few were hesitant, worried about retaliation. I understood that fear all too well. I'd felt it when those fake officers blocked the driveway, but I reassured them everything would be documented and I wouldn't let anyone get hurt. By mid-afternoon, I had collected dozens of statements, photos, and video clips. Some neighbors shared stories about letters with ridiculous fines, threats to remove livestock, and notices claiming land that clearly didn't belong to the HOA. Others had photos of the HOA president standing on multiple properties, handing out fake documents like candy. The more I gathered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about my ranch. They were running a small empire of intimidation, and I was about to pull the rug out from under them. Next, I contacted local law enforcement. I wasn't calling for immediate action. I wanted to confirm the legal boundaries and make sure everything was solid before the next confrontation. The officer I spoke with was patient and thorough, asking questions and requesting copies of the deeds and property maps. As I emailed them everything, I felt a surge of confidence. I wasn't just hoping for justice, I was preparing it. Meanwhile, the HOA president didn't sit idle. I noticed more signs popping up along the property edges, some misspelled, others hastily printed. I laughed aloud while walking past them. "You really think cardboard and ink are going to scare me?" I muttered. But I knew I couldn't underestimate her desperation. She had already shown she'd lie, bluff, and manipulate. By evening, I reviewed all the evidence one more time. Everything lined up perfectly. Official county documents, photographs of property lines, video of the standoff, witness statements. The picture was crystal clear. These people had no authority, and I had the proof to end their charade once and for all. I also knew timing mattered. The HOA president liked to operate with confidence, assuming no one would challenge her. I had to strike when I was fully ready, fully prepared, and fully visible to the witnesses and the law. One wrong move and it could look like harassment, not defense. That night I sat on the porch of the ranch, watching the sun set over the fields. The air was still, the cows grazing peacefully and the barn casting long shadows. I felt a strange mix of anticipation and calm. Tomorrow, I thought, we make this official. We show the neighbors, the officers, and the world exactly who owns the land and who doesn't. I smiled, thinking of the HOA president trying to bluff her way through this mess. I imagined her in her office, realizing she had finally met someone who wouldn't back down, someone who had the truth on their side. I checked my camera setup one last time and whispered to myself, "This ends tomorrow. No more pretending, no more fake badges, no more threats. Time to set things right." With that, I went inside, ready to rest. The next day would be the moment of truth, the confrontation that would either finally expose the HOA or test every ounce of patience and planning I'd put into this fight. One thing was certain: I wasn't just reclaiming land. I was reclaiming justice, pride, and every ounce of peace my family had built over generations. The sun rose over the ranch like it was spotlighting the stage for the showdown. Today, I wasn't just walking onto my property. I was going to expose the HOA for the frauds they really were. I had every piece of evidence lined up, witnesses ready, and law enforcement on my side. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. This was about the truth. As I drove down the gravel driveway, my truck kicking up dust, I could see them waiting, two fake officers and of course the HOA president herself, standing with her usual smug expression. She looked confident, like she believed she had the power to scare anyone away. I almost laughed, almost. I stepped out of the truck, camera rolling, and called out, "Good morning. I hope everyone is ready to see the truth today." The officers tensed, their eyes flicking nervously to the trees, knowing neighbors were watching. And there she was, the HOA president, sunglasses hiding her expression but not her arrogance. She raised a hand, trying to command the situation. "You shouldn't be here." I took a deep breath and held up the documents I had spent days organizing. I'm here because this property has been in my family for generations. These are the deeds verified by the county, signed and recorded. Everything you've been claiming, fake, fraudulent, and documented. The officers glanced at each other. Their confident smirks were gone. I could see the cracks forming. One shuffled his feet, awkwardly holding the clipboard as if it might protect him from reality. Let's go through this slowly, I said, moving toward them. I laid out maps, highlighted boundary lines, and showed photos of the ranch over the years. Every inch of this land belongs to my family. Your HOA authority ends at your imagination. The HOA president's lips tightened. She took a step forward, trying to maintain control. She started, but I held up a hand. No, let's not pretend anymore. We've got witnesses. I nodded toward the neighbors who had quietly stepped out from behind trees and fences, all holding cameras and phones. They've seen what you've done, the intimidation, the threats, and now we have the law. I motioned to a local officer who had arrived quietly behind me. Officer here can confirm ownership, check the deeds, and see who is telling the truth. Spoiler alert, it's me. The HOA president's jaw clenched. She tried to argue, pulling out some papers she claimed were legal documents, but the officer took one look and shook his head. These aren't valid, he said flatly. The property belongs to your family. You have no legal claim here. I felt a surge of satisfaction. The fake authority, the threats, the smirks, they all melted away in an instant. The HOA president looked like she had just realized the rug had been pulled out from under her. The officers were silent, no words, just awkward glances. I kept the camera rolling, documenting everything. Every slip-up, every failed bluff, every panicked expression, it was all proof. The neighbors whispered among themselves, some laughing quietly, some shaking their heads in disbelief at how ridiculous it all looked from the outside. Finally, I stepped back and addressed the HOA president directly. You tried to steal what wasn't yours, threaten people, and claim authority you didn't have. Today, everyone can see the truth. Your bluff is over. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There were no words left. I could see her mind racing, trying to salvage some shred of control, but there wasn't any. The neighbors started clapping quietly, some cheering. The fake officers turned and slinked back toward their trucks, defeated. The HOA president finally turned and walked away, furious but powerless. I stood there for a moment, letting it sink in. The ranch was ours, every inch of it. The decades of family history, the memories, the blood, sweat, and tears, it was safe again. And for the first time in weeks, I felt that calm, triumphant peace settle over me. I looked at the sun setting over the hills, casting long shadows across the fields, and I couldn't help but smile. This wasn't just about property. It was about standing up, reclaiming what's yours, and proving that truth and persistence always win against lies and intimidation. I turned to the camera and said, half joking, half serious, lesson learned, HOA, never underestimate someone who's protecting their home or their cows. And with that, I knew the story of the ranch had a new chapter, one where the legacy of my family would continue, unbroken and untouchable. The morning after the big reveal felt different. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, like it had been waiting for me to reclaim it. No fake officers, no HOA president, no threats, just the soft breeze, the rustle of leaves, and the distant lowing of cows. It felt right. I stepped out of my truck, stretching and letting the sun warm my face. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel that knot of tension in my chest. This was home, my home. The property that had been in my family for generations was ours again, fully and completely. Walking across the gravel driveway, I looked at every fence post, every barn, every old oak tree. Memories flooded me, my dad showing me how to drive the tractor, my little brother chasing chickens across the field, the smell of mom's cooking drifting from the kitchen window. The land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was history, laughter, and love. And no HOA, no fake officer, and no corrupt president could ever take that away. I spent the morning talking to neighbors, hearing their reactions. Some were relieved, others laughed at how ridiculous the whole situation had been. Everyone agreed the HOA had gone too far this time. Some whispered about taking legal action themselves. I smiled, knowing that standing up for my ranch had inspired others. It wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about showing people that they could fight back when someone tried to bully them. By midday, I decided to do a full tour of the property. I filmed it all, not for social media, not for attention, but to preserve the history, the land, and the story of how we reclaimed it. Every fence line, every pasture, every landmark was documented. I wanted a permanent record for the future, something the HOA or anyone else could never dispute. I even walked up to the barn where Dad's old truck still sat, a little dusty but perfectly intact. I ran my hand over the hood, remembering how he'd taught me to fix it, drive it, and take care of it. The ranch wasn't just land, it was legacy. And legacy wasn't something you could steal with fake badges and flimsy papers. Around the pond, I noticed the sunlight sparkling on the water. I smiled, remembering how I'd spent hours here as a kid, throwing sticks for the dogs, fishing with Dad, or just sitting and watching the world go by. The HOA had tried to block me, intimidate me, and claim it as theirs, but here I was, free, unbothered, and fully in control. By afternoon, I had made my way to the main gate where it all began. I took down the last of the fake signs, the ones that claimed private HOA property. I tossed them into the truck bed and laughed quietly. They had tried to rewrite history with cardboard and ink, and now it was gone, replaced with the truth, my family's ranch. I called Dad and my cousin, letting them know everything was finally settled. Their voices were full of relief and pride. "We knew you'd handle it," Dad said. "This ranch has always been in good hands." My cousin chuckled. "And you did it without getting trampled by cows or losing your temper?" "Barely." I laughed, feeling the tension of the last few weeks melting away. As the sun began to set, I walked across the fields one last time, taking in the sights, the smells, the feeling of belonging that no HOA or fake officer could ever take away. I thought about the lessons learned. Persistence matters, evidence matters, and standing your ground matters. Sometimes the fight is long, the path is tricky, but the reward, peace, pride, and legacy is worth every step. I paused by the big oak tree, the one I had climbed as a kid, and took a deep breath. The ranch was ours again. No one could dispute it, no one could threaten it. And I knew that the next generation, my children, cousins, or even the neighbors, would inherit a place defended with honesty, courage, and a little stubbornness. Finally, I turned toward the horizon, the wind carrying the scent of grass and earth. "This is home," I whispered, almost to myself, "and no one can ever take it away." With that, I climbed back into the truck, ready to face whatever came next, but secure in the knowledge that the ranch, our family legacy, was safe, untouchable, and ours forever. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.